Cyber Insiders, untold stories from behind the cyber frontline.
Hi, and welcome to Cyber Insiders, the podcast that looks at what it's really like to work on the front line. I'm Dominique Adams, your host and communications lead at Adarma, one of the UK's leading managed security service providers. Now, today I'm going to be talking to Cian Heasley, who is threat lead at Adarma. We're going to be discussing Chinese state-sponsored threat actor Salt Typhoon, who recently made headlines for their ongoing and high-profile attacks on global telecommunications providers. Now, by the end of this episode, hopefully you'll have a clear understanding of who Salt Typhoon are, their tactics, their motivations, and how they choose their victims. So, without further ado, let's just get into this. Cian, can you please give us a quick overview of who Salt Typhoon are?
Yeah, of course. So Salt Typhoon are a group that have been around for a while now. I think they were first noticed in 2019 by security companies and governments. But the last few years, they've really been making headlines. They've been quite aggressive in the activities that they've been undertaking. So they're an espionage group. They're espionage-focused APT, I should say, linked to the government of the People's Republic of China, specifically their Ministry of State Security, and they are particularly interested in telecommunications companies and telecommunications-related research. I should also talk a little bit about the name. So when we talk about Salt Typhoon, that's the name that Microsoft's threat team have given them. Microsoft now use weather as the basis for their names. CrowdStrike call them Liminal Panda because they use animals for their names. And then you'll find other companies call them names, including Red Mike, Earth Estries, Famous Sparrow, Ghost Emperor, and UNC 2286 is the least human-friendly probably of all the names that they're given.
Oh my goodness, they've got more names than Prince. How do we keep track of all of those names?
You just, for our team, we either choose the Microsoft name or the CrowdStrike name because, to be honest, they're usually the easiest to remember. But everyone else, I don't know. You just have to choose one and stick with it.
Okay, I think it's good. Well, for the sake of this, shall we just call them Salt Typhoon?
I think that's safe, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So let's talk a little bit about them. From their activities and their headlines, what do we know about their activities? What are their tactics, techniques, and procedures? What are the hallmarks of a Salt Typhoon attack?
Yeah, sure. So Salt Typhoon, interestingly, they sort of follow a similar evolution of tactics to some of the larger ransomware groups that are better organized. So they started off doing traditional spear phishing. So they would target specific employees at a telecom company or at a university or whatever they were targeting. They would get them to then install a backdoor on their system, and then that's how they would access the network. But in 2022, they changed up their tactics. So instead of focusing so much on spear phishing, they started looking for vulnerable internet-facing devices that were on networks that they were interested in. So your routers, your VoIP systems, servers that need to be accessible from the internet, like Exchange, on-prem services like that. And then what we see based around those tactics, that change in tactics is that they get an initial foothold on one of these devices that's internet-facing, it's on the edge of your network. And then, especially if it's a router, they can use that to then allow themselves access to other parts of your network. So they'll basically build on that initial access from, say, a router through to maybe an internal router, and then use that to be able to target machines that maybe are less locked down because they're internal to the network that they're targeting. They're not maybe as high priority because they're not on the actual edge. And so they are using the vulnerabilities they're using as well. They're not 0 days. These are known vulnerabilities. So in some cases, I think I read of one case where they used a 6-year-old vulnerability to get onto a network. So they're looking for poorly maintained pieces of kit that haven't been updated, haven't been patched properly, maybe aren't being monitored properly. And then, they're finding that as the hole in the armor that they can basically get in through. And then they also have their own malware. So they're not using off-the-shelf stuff. They have their own internally developed malware. Once they're onto a Windows system or Linux system, they can install backdoors or, other methods of maintaining access, basically. So that's a really quick roundup of how they've evolved in terms of their tactics and techniques.
Oh my goodness, that's the quick one. That sounds so complicated. So would it be safe to say then they're one of the more sophisticated threat actors that are out there?
Yes, I think the custom malware and that how easily and well hidden the custom malware is makes them more advanced. the actual techniques of getting onto the networks are not that advanced. They're using, existing well-known vulnerabilities. They're just relying on the fact that it's difficult for people to keep everything patched. So the initial stages maybe aren't so advanced, but once they're on networks, it's clear that they're having really good ability to stay hidden. I know that some ISPs and telecom companies in the US are still trying to basically remediate, make sure that they've got all the backdoors and the various access points that they have. So once they actually get into your network, it seems like they're very difficult to get rid of.
Yeah, because in some of the news articles I read about them, they said that they've been dwelling and hiding out and lurking in the networks for quite a while. So, I mean, obviously that hints that they're kind of good at like evading like detection. I think one of them was like the attack was back in, was it September? And it only just got picked up now. It's only just made some headlines. I think it was it Cisco?
I don't know if it was Cisco. I think it might be Cisco devices that were on telecom networks. I think it was basically unpatched Cisco devices that were being used by telecom companies. And also their ability to stay hidden really is also as a result of their goals. So they're not looking to deploy ransomware. They're not looking to destroy anything. They're basically looking to just steal data quietly. So that really lends itself to being stealthy. They can get on a network, and so long as they have access to the data they want, that they can siphon that data out. They don't really need to do anything that's going to draw attention to themselves. They can just sit quietly and maintain that access. So it really is perfect for a group that wants to maintain stealthiness, that their goals match with those.
Yeah, well, that if they're just there to steal data, then that leads me to kind of like my next question, like what type of organizations and sectors they're going after. And just for our listeners who may not know, can you explain why that type of data is just so valuable to people like Salt Typhoon?
Yeah, of course. So there's four main types of targets that they have. So they have telecom companies, so your large telecommunications providers, ISPs. Now, ISPs and telecoms, there's a certain amount of crossover there. Sometimes your phone provider might also essentially be your ISP. So it makes sense that they would target both of those. And then there's government and government-related NGOs. So I know recently the Treasury Department in the US basically accused a specific threat actor, a specific named person in China of being involved with Salt Typhoon and a specific company. And I think that was linked to an attempt or a breach of the Treasury Department. And government-related NGOs, apparently they can use those as a stepping stone to get onto a government network. So an NGO that works with a specific government department in a specific country might have access. If Salt Typhoon can get access to their systems, maybe they can then send a phishing email, or they can discover if there's network links that they can exploit, something like that.
Yeah, and just on that topic of like government, I mean, a lot, let's not turn this into a political podcast, but a lot's going on in the world at the moment with cybersecurity and regulation. Like, why should everyone kind of be set up and be aware of Salt Typhoon? And also, what are the implications of, say, things that are happening possibly in the US that have greater implications for threat groups like this? Is it going to, if there's sort of a decrease in oversight, like, is it going to possibly lead to emboldening these groups and seeing activity escalate?
Yeah, of course. So when we're talking about the types of data that they steal and the types of companies, it is very sensitive data, telecommunications data, ISP data, and the ability to potentially, snoop on who's contacting who, whether it's via email or what website someone's accessing, or even who's text messaging who's calling who. It's the ability then to really start piecing together if you're looking at specific people, or you're trying to do, some sort of espionage. Say you're targeting a specific government agency or something, you could see who people are in contact with, who they're talking to. You might be able to use that either to try and gain more information about them, or you could impersonate those people. There's all kinds of outcomes there. When it comes to potential for deregulation in the US, I think that is a problem. I think companies need to be given a fairly strict guidelines. If they're in an area like telecommunications where it's very sensitive data, they need to be told, you need to secure your systems, you need minimum standards of security. The other concern is that CISA, the government agency deals primarily with cybersecurity, has seen a big shakeup in the leadership right now. And I think they were just due to release a large report on Salt Typhoon. And now I think the outcome of that report, or whether it's going to be released, or whether the people who are writing it are even still working at the agency, is really up in the air. And obviously in the middle of a pretty dramatic series of hacks against various US telecoms, you don't want the people investigating those hacks to suddenly lose their jobs. You want them to be able to at least finish out the investigation because it is very serious. It is, to think of 5 or 6 major telecom companies in the US having been compromised in this way is a national security issue for the US.
Yeah, so it's fair to say they're a major threat to critical national infrastructure.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we've kind of set the scene now. So I think what would be really kind of good to know is, like, if you're a company, what are the key indicators that you might be dealing with Salt Typhoon? Like a Salt Typhoon sort of attack, like what should like an immediate response look like?
Yep. So because of the fact that Salt Typhoon are using known vulnerabilities, it's a bit more difficult than if they were using a 0-day. So, for instance, Clop ransomware used the Move It vulnerability Move It software. So, if you were exploited, chances are it was by Clop, if it was through Move It. With Salt Typhoon, they're using existing known Cisco vulnerabilities. They're using vulnerabilities like proxy logon, which is for Microsoft Exchange. But these are not new. A lot of these vulnerabilities are from a year, 2 years ago, 3 years more even. So I guess that the main thing there is that you know what's on your network edge. You know what devices you have, what servers you have that are able to access the internet or be accessed from the internet, I should say. And you monitor those. You make sure someone's looking at the logging from them. You make sure that you're not using default logins, and you make sure that they're patched and that you have like a regular a system in place to check that they're patched, to make sure the patches are actually installed properly, and to make sure that there's follow up on that to then check 6 months down the line, are the new patches available.
So sorry, you keep going.
No, I was going to say, so that's your network edge. That's the outside. When you're looking deeper into your network, you want to make sure that you have EDR deployed. You want to make sure that you have antivirus deployed at the very least on systems. You want to make sure that you're monitoring your Linux systems. A lot of companies I find fall down a little bit in that area in properly monitoring their Linux machines, which can be very useful to an attacker. If they can get on a Linux machine, they can use that to pivot. And basically, they've got a machine on your network that they can install hacking tools on. And if it's not monitored, then that's a huge problem. But yeah, I think those are the main things: is secure your network edge, monitor your network edge, and then make sure that your sensitive machines internally are also monitored and that they're secured.
Yeah, I think that kind of takes me on to my next point, though. And it's around, like, you read the headlines like, there are this many cybersecurity jobs, we can't fill them, we're lacking expertise, AI and automation is advancing so fast that, there's that joke about, you see a job description for someone, a role for someone who's 23, but they're already wanting you to have like 20 plus years experience, even though you're a new graduate. So I think for me, like, you say you've got this organization, you maybe got a team that's already like, or that's got gaps or something in it. Like, how are organizations, like, how can they up their cyber resilience and do the things that you've said if maybe they're even starting, they're way further back on their cybersecurity journey? Like, how, if we're facing all these kind of challenges, do we get from A to true cyber resilience? Like, what's your opinion on that?
So I'm a firm believer in do the basics well. And it's boring. It's not as sexy as a lot of the more high profile sort of AI discussions and all of that. But if you have your vulnerability management program in place, if you're trying to think about what groups are a threat to your organization, and then you're making sure that you're tailoring your detections to those groups, at least hitting those targets of these are the groups that I think might get me. At least then you can look at the security controls that will protect you from them, whether it's phishing protection, if it's primarily phishing that might target you, or in this case vulnerability management for your network devices. You can start to take what is essentially a big bucket of possible things that you can do, and you can start to narrow it down and prioritize. And that's really important, because if you are a smaller company, or you have a smaller cybersecurity team, or you're just stretched thin, there's infinite possibilities for things that you can do to secure your business. But you really need to start thinking of what are the top 20 things, what are the top 50 things we can do now. And in this case, it would really be just patch. Make sure you're monitoring that. Make sure that someone is keeping an eye on what's accessible, whether that's looking in Shodan at your network and seeing, hey, we've got a server here that we forgot about that's still online but can connect back into our main network, or hey, we've got an old Cisco router that's still connected to an old data center that we didn't think about, but actually still active. I've seen cases like that before, where there's a Cobalt Strike beacon in a data center that was essentially decommissioned, but there's still some systems online. All of these things, you just need to be really aware of what's happening with your network. And bigger networks, it's really complex. It is. And that's the problem I think these telecommunications companies have, is that they have a huge amount of an estate to monitor.
Yeah, that was going to be kind of like my next question is like, that you're saying everything right. Those are all the right steps. Ding, 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 tick, tick, tick. But like, say you've got all these blank areas that you don't even know you have, like, what would you recommend? What would your recommendation be at that point where you're literally kind of going, I don't even know what I have? Because like you said, there could be stuff hidden on legacy systems that maybe a predecessor put in place, and now you're kind of groping around in the darkness trying to figure out what it is you actually have in terms of your digital ecosystem. So what would you recommend in that instance?
So you need, and this is something a lot of companies struggle with, and I understand. I mean, it's difficult. Asset management, asset inventory. So you need some way of inventorying your assets, and that's the place you have to start at, because you can, if you know about vulnerabilities in your known assets, that's one thing. But as you say, there might be entire systems, entire small network areas that are just completely unmonitored, completely unmaintained, just, kind of forgotten about, or they're just chugging away in the background. And because nothing's broken, no one's really thinking about them. I know this is easy to do with Linux systems as well. You've got a server that just does one thing, and you're not worried about it. It just keeps on doing that. I think Move It highlighted that as well. Move It servers were reliant on a Windows machine to basically run off of, but a lot of companies were not monitoring that machine very well. The machine was actually running Move It. So when the servers were hacked, there wasn't really an analysis of those logs that would have shown somebody, for a lot of companies, I think that something had gone wrong. So I think that's a good example there of, just because something just chugs along in the background and does its job, and maybe doesn't, ever fall over, it's still, if it's accessible from the internet, it's extremely important that you keep a close eye on it. So I would say, whatever the solution is, if you need to bring in third-party software, or some EDR tools will do some asset discovery, asset inventory. You just need to sit down, rip the Band-Aid off, and then work out what's out there, and get to grips with it. Some of it might be terrible, but it's better than waiting till you get hacked and then you discover that the attackers have jumped through some systems that you have completely no logging for, no visibility of.
Yeah, because that also, I suppose, would have some regulatory implications. Like if you're not doing, you're not meeting what's been set out to you, like that's always supposed as well a risk that if you're not doing the basics. And
Yeah,
it's best not
theoretically,
to wait. Oh, sorry, I was going to say you don't want to wait till the wheels fall off the car. You should probably get it in and MOT'd before that incident happens.
yeah, of course. And also, I mean, just it's not good from a regulatory perspective, but also you just want your customers to have confidence in you. You want them to have confidence that you know exactly, what your assets are, where your weak points are, what you need to monitor. You don't want to have to admit afterwards that, you took your eye off the ball completely.
Yeah, I think as well, sometimes in the whole cybersecurity sphere, we get so focused on other bits that you forget that like fundamentally breaking that trust with your customers it has a long-term impact and does long-term brand damage in how people think about you. So
We've
that's a
seen
very
in the US especially, we've seen the large telecom companies get hacked, whether it's by people who are doing SIM swapping, and there's no protections there. People are able to gain access to employee tools that were then able to reassign phone numbers or disconnect phone numbers or whatever. Large thefts of databases of customers that have been sold online. And those are just from regular cyber criminals. Those are just from script kiddies and ransomware gangs and whoever else. This is a whole new level then, obviously with Salt Typhoon on top of that, where you're looking at the national security implications of a foreign government potentially having access to, the vice president or the president's phone records, which I think is one of the fears in this case. So, yeah, it's a massive deal.
So just right, we're kind of like, I think you've given us a really comprehensive overview of who Salt Typhoon are, what they're up to, what we should be looking out for. But seeing as I've got you, I do have a question that I would love to ask because, I know we're just at the end of February, but still people are talking about who is one to look out for in terms of ransomware groups that are up and coming. I've seen so many, but it's always the same characters. And I'm just wondering, you, in your experience, is there a group there that you're thinking they're not getting nearly enough attention and they should? Not like attention in a good way, but more people should be aware of? Or is there a group that you're like thinking they're the ones to watch? They're going to get extra sneaky this year. So
Yep. So the obvious answer is Ransom Hub, although that shouldn't be a shock to anyone. I think they've been one of the top ransomware groups for the last 2 quarters of 2024. They've really taken over from where Lockbit was before. I think we're going to see a lot of innovation in terms of how ransomware groups get initial access. So some groups started doing elaborate Teams phishing, so they would connect over Teams and then send a message. We saw another group that was doing like a spam campaign against a specific person, and then they would do a call and say that they were from tech support. They would say, "Oh, we noticed you just got a ton of emails," but they would have been the ones that sent it, and then they would say, "You need to install this tool so we can make sure that your machine isn't infected." So I think we're going to see more social engineering, more elaborate sort of attempts to either spearfish people in email, or I hate to say voice phishing. I hate all of this phishing, smishing, all of this, but it might be a Teams call, it might be a phone call, it might be a WhatsApp message, but more elaborate ways of getting around, because otherwise they have to try and do phishing emails, which are caught a lot of the time now more easily, or looking for vulnerable pieces of equipment like I was talking about earlier. And those low-hanging fruit for a lot of businesses are going to be patched now.
And then I've got another question I always like to ask people who work kind of like in threat is, what is your cybersecurity bugbear? Like something you encounter, or like even with when you're like assessing something or like a common threat, you go, this should be known by now. This should be fixed. Like, what is your cybersecurity bugbear that makes you roll your eyes?
So it's, I guess it might just be on my mind because we were just talking about it, but asset and inventory management is a big one for me. If you want to prioritize what you're protecting, you need to know what you have, and then only then can you properly ascertain and say, okay, we've got 400 systems, but of those 20 are really important to our business, so we prioritize those 20, but the other 380 you need to still be thinking about. That's one. The other one is lack of monitoring on servers. So I was talking about MoveIt earlier. If you've got a server that's doing something important or is accessible from the internet, you need to have a SIEM or EDR agent on there, recording back, pulling logs from it, and you need to be monitoring and making sure that that's there's alerts running against that, detections. So those are, I guess, my two big ones.
Well, thank you. I think, I think I thought I was like, he's going to say something about like monitoring and stuff. So yeah, no, that's really informative and really good. Thank you. Thank you for taking this time and like sharing your thoughts with us, the listeners.
Thanks for having me. It's been wonderful.
No worries. So I think to all our listeners, I want to say thank you for joining us, and I really hope that you enjoyed this. And if you'd really like to learn more about Adarma or how we can help organizations like fortify their cyber resilience, or to discuss any of the things that were raised today or any of the recommendations that Cian made, then please get in touch with us at hello@adarma.com. So until next time, from me and from Cian, take care of yourself.
Cyber Insiders from Adarma. Follow and rate on your podcast app. Together, we've got this.